So before we get going, I think it's really important to clear the air on a few terms or ways in which we talk about pranayama. Now, these days in the Western world, in the modern context of both yoga practice and in the regular wellness world, we have this term breathwork and pranayama. And I find that sometimes there's a little bit of confusion on what's what and what's not. And I think it's important on this as a yoga course or training to give a little bit of clarity so that you have an understanding both for yourself and how you can share. Now, for me, it's really important to recognize that breathwork and pranayama are both very valuable practices. And in many ways, pranayama is breathwork, but breathwork isn't necessarily pranayama. And so what I mean by that is the traditional breathing practices, the classical yogic breathing pranayama practices, are practices that have been around for a very long time and have essence and origin through the ancient yoga traditions, scriptures, and practices. Where that makes it quite specific is that they tie directly into certain practices. So you might have heard practices like Ujjayi breath or Nadishodhana or Bhastrika or Kapalabhati. All these kinds of pranayama techniques are very specific techniques that have a connection and a lineage and a length that connects them to the traditional yogic practices. However, now in the modern context, as we learn more about breath science, breath physiology, the mechanics of how we breathe, the breathing that infects us both in how we perform, whether we're using it athletically or physically, for example, like in practice, or we're using them for stress release, stress reduction, management. We understand that the mechanics, the anatomy, and the physiology of the breath have a huge power and potency to help support the way in which we use the breath to better our well-being. Breathwork is an overarching term that's used to explore techniques, understanding, but combine both the modern Western perspective of breath science, anatomy, and physiology with the connection or inspiration or in conjunction with yogic pranayama techniques. In many ways, yogic pranayama techniques are the inspiration and the early insights to what we now know more about from a physiology and an anatomical point of view when we work with the breath. So when we talk about breath work can mean anything related to the breath in our understanding, how it can better our breath, work with the mechanics of how we breathe, and take the influences and inspiration from yogic pranayama breathing practices. And in many ways, I'm a huge fan of that. I have many courses and programs, and we have a whole training school and system called Just Breathe, which focuses on more of a modern perspective or a Western digestion for using breathwork practices and meditation and deep breath practices to support and regulate your nervous system, to deal with hyperstimulation and other stresses in our everyday life, and using those techniques, powerful techniques, to help manage our everyday well-being. In this context, when we're talking about pranayama, which is what's important for you to know, to learn, and to share, is that if you are someone who connects with the traditional aspects of the practice, the traditions of the practices that have brought forth into the Western, the modern context, then you're going to speak from a lens, or you're going to speak from a perspective of yogic pranayama practices. That means traditional practices and insights that come from hundreds and thousands of years of learning from scriptures, from practice, from India, from the origins of the practice, and that's important in what we're going to talk about in this discussion. But to clear the air, to set the scene, to build the foundation, the easiest way to understand it is yogic pranayama techniques are the techniques we're going to look at in a yoga practice, and they form a part of what a breathwork perspective is. However, a breathwork perspective will bring in more breath science, breathing anatomy and physiology, mechanics of functional breathing, different techniques to serve and support different response states and nervous system regulation. So they both have huge value, but as we begin in this conversation, I want to stay towards the focus towards the traditional yogic pranayama practices, which is so essential to build the baseline of your understanding in teaching and sharing these practices.